The 21st century tensions between the United States and Iran are well known, and the situation has come close to its boiling point several times in recent years. But what if this geopolitical powder keg was suddenly ignited? Today, we're going to explore the hypothetical future in which the United States launches an invasion of Iran and what the potential outcome of such a war could be. For starters, the United States public is really against starting another large-scale war in the Middle East. After the messy war in Iraq, the disastrous withdrawal from Afghanistan, and numerous other US involvements in the 21st century, these seemingly unending conflicts have swallowed up trillions of dollars and thousands of American lives, and the US public is just not in the mood for another one. If the US wanted to invade Iran, then they would need a seriously good reason at this point, and the justification needs to be solid enough not only to get the American public on board, but also the rest of NATO. Alright, so we got the justification for an invasion, whether it be nuclear, defensive, or a liberation mission, and now it's time to explore just how difficult this invasion would actually be to pull off, and whether or not the United States is even up to the task. Iran's main advantage in defending its territory is its geography. For starters, Iran is straight up massive. It is the world's 17th largest nation, with a total land area of more than 1.6 million square kilometers, or more than 600,000 square miles. To put that in some perspective, it's about 3 times larger than all of France, or about the size of Alaska. And throughout this large area, there is plenty of rough terrain like the Zagros Mountains, which stretch across much of Iran, and also the Alborz Range, which contains Iran's tallest mountain, the volcanic Mount Damavand. This rugged landscape of mountains, hills, and valleys is a thorn in the side of any invading force and provides an ideal place for insurgents to hide. Additionally, Iran's deserts aren't well suited for mechanized crossing. In the Dasht-e-Kavir, for example, also known as the Great Salt Desert, the landscape consists of a salt crust covering a deep layer of thick mud. One wrong step and you can easily break through the salt and find yourself stuck in the quagmire underneath, making it essentially impossible for vehicles and incredibly difficult to traverse on foot. A private intelligence firm called Stratfor has called this desert one of the most miserable places on Earth. Iran also benefits from a highly strategic location. If the United States wanted to launch an invasion, it needs a staging area to gather its forces, and Iran doesn't have a great land border for such an attack. In fact, of the 7 countries Iran borders, not a single one is a great option. It's highly doubtful that Turkmenistan, Afghanistan, or Pakistan would want to get involved by allowing US troops to prepare on their soil, so the East is out of the question. Same goes for Azerbaijan and Armenia, who are a bit involved with a conflict between themselves and are perpetually under the gaze of an increasingly aggressive Russian Federation, who might not be too happy if they were to aid the United States. It's unlikely that Iraq would stage the US invasion as well, as they would be opening up their own country to preemptive strikes as the military build-up became clear, and Iraq has been pushing for the US and its coalition forces to get out of its borders for years now. So that leaves us with one last option, Turkey, which at first glance is a NATO ally and seems promising, but there's little to no chance that Turkey lends a hand at all. Despite being a member of NATO, relations with Turkey have been a bit strained in recent. So without a confirmed land route, the only way the United States is going to get a significant amount of troops into Iran is through its southern coastline, meaning that a large amphibious invasion is likely going to be a central feature of a war, but even this doesn't feel like a great option. Entering Iran from the coastline in the Persian Gulf and the Gulf of Oman puts the invading forces on the opposite side of the country from Iran's capital, Tehran. A successful landing in the port city Bandar Abbas, for example, would put the invading forces more than 1,000 kilometers or more than 600 miles from the capital. And that's only once the US is able to get to the actual coastline, as Iran has numerous fortified islands that the Americans will have to contend with before even attempting to establish a beachhead. And this is largely down to the fact that Iran is aware that the coastline is the most likely invasion point for any foreign power and has been building up its defenses here specifically to counter this. The many rocky coves and inlets are ideal places for small boats to hide, and these could be a serious threat to any approaching US ships. These smaller craft are a far bigger problem than you might expect. In 2002, the US military conducted simulated war games between Blue Team, United States, and Red Team, a fictitious Persian Gulf state, which was clearly meant to portray Iran or Iraq. Obviously, at a disadvantage against the United States, the Red Team came up with some pretty ingenious tactics to win many of the simulated battles. To evade interception of their communications, they used motorcycle couriers and old-fashioned light signals, and when the Blue Team brought in the might of their navy, Red Team launched a huge barrage of cruise missiles, so many that it overwhelmed overwhelmed the ship's radars. Following the missiles, they launched a wave of smaller boats running hit-and-run as well as kamikaze missions. The small boats were so numerous and so close to the larger warships that they had trouble detecting and fighting them, essentially leaving them as sitting ducks. When all was said and done, the Red Team that simulated Iran had destroyed 16 US warships, including an aircraft carrier, in an attack that, if carried out in real life, would have killed an estimated 20,000 American service members. Red Team's underdog victory had been led by Lieutenant General Paul Riper, a Marine with years of experience from the Vietnam War and the Gulf War. Unfortunately for Paul Riper, his superiors weren't too happy with losing, and so the whole simulation was redone with a few new constraints. The location of Red Team's troops were given to the enemy. They were ordered to not shoot down any of Blue's air assets, and certain weapons were banned from the wargame. Of course, after these new rules had been added, the US went on to a crushing victory. Not really a surprise there. These exercises, known as the Millennium Challenge 2002, really showed how unprepared the US was for an asymmetric strike during an amphibious landing. Paul Riper criticized his command, saying that they had to rig the game in order to win, but he was brushed off. Now, keep in mind, this was 20 years ago, and it's unlikely that any Iranian officer would have nearly the same knowledge of the inner workings of the US military like Paul Riper and his team did. But the point still stands. Approaching Iran's beaches might be a lot harder than expected, and if they play their cards right, Iran's initial defenses could deal some serious damage before US troops have even set foot on their